Hi, this is Mike Benak, Director of Product Management with Nu-Calgon, and today we're going to talk about basic chemical handling training, and this will cover some tips and tricks for the wholesalers and also for the contractors that are utilizing some of our coil cleaners. So first thing we'll talk about is why is the safe handling of chemicals so important, and it should be relatively obvious that mishandling chemicals can be harmful. It can be harmful to you. It can be harmful to others around you. It can cause skin allergies and asthma, depending on which chemicals that you could come in contact with. And they can lead all the way up to skin burns and eye damage. There's many chemicals out there that can be corrosive to the skin. They can be irritants, and so we just need to be very cautious. And it is very important that we handle these chemicals safely. Part of that safe handling of chemicals is understanding the chemicals and the risks that are involved. So one thing to know is where to access and how to access the safety data sheet, or is what's commonly called to as the SDSs, and how to find that and read it. You know, the SDS has a lot of important information in it as far as first aid is concerned. If you did come in contact with a chemical, what personal protective equipment needs to be worn, all that good stuff is in the safety data sheet. So it's important to know where it is and how to access it. And because all chemicals are different, they have different hazards. So it's not one size fits all with these chemicals. One may be corrosive to the skin, one may just be an irritant, and one may have very little to no hazards. So it's important to understand what we're dealing with. EHCS pictograms and hazards are also important to know and understand. These are designed to be a quick reference for the end user or person handling the chemicals, so that they understand what their risks are, what the hazards are with the products that they're handling. They need to be able to be sure to understand them, to read them. The pictograms are designed to be easy to read. In the center, you'll see one with at the top center, it's a flame, and the pictogram shows a flame. That helps the end user recognize that it could be a flammable, and that lets them know likely not to be using this chemical around flames. And on down the line, there's other pictograms to represent different hazards. Now let's talk about the safe handling of chemicals and some very simple do's and don'ts to keep in mind. When storing chemicals safely, we want to keep them clean, cool, and dry. We also want to make sure that we do keep them in their original containers, and we're not putting them in other containers that maybe don't have the right labels on them. And you want to securely store those chemicals to prevent access from vulnerable people, which could be kids or adults that aren't familiar with chemicals and don't know proper handling of them. Some things to keep in mind not to do. We don't want to mix chemical products. Mixing them could result in hazardous byproducts, so we want to make sure we don't mix them. We don't want to use chemicals if you are not trained to use them safely. So again, we don't want people using them or handling them that don't know what they're doing. And don't leave chemical products open or unattended. So again, it's very important to keep them secure and not leave them out for people that be in contact with them that aren't trained properly. Now let's talk about coil cleaning and some best practices around coil cleaning. It's very important to practice safety when using these coil cleaners because they can be dangerous, and they're typically used outdoors and sometimes indoors in occupied areas, so we want to make sure that we do practice safety. So we'll touch on a few of these, and this is again to help the contractors and the end users stay safe when they're using these chemicals. So the first thing to keep in mind is wearing the proper personal protective equipment, or PPE. So that can be anything from wearing goggles, gloves, and work boots. And the best thing to do is consult with the label or the SDS to understand what the proper PPE is that's required for the chemical being used. The reason for this PPE is to avoid contact with the skin, and we want to avoid breathing the chemicals, mists, or fumes. Again, different chemicals will have different levels of fumes that come off of them, and in almost every case, you don't want to be breathing those fumes, and certainly not the mists that could come off of those coil cleaners. And be aware of the surroundings. So that could be anything from the rooftop, if we're cleaning a rooftop air conditioner or refrigeration system. We want to know the materials that the roof is made out of. We want to understand if there's plants around the area, if we're cleaning a condenser in the backyard of someone's home. As far as and as well as foods, if we're in a restaurant or a grocery store, we want to make sure that we know what's around us, because some certain chemicals are designed to foam, and if there's any overspray, we want to make sure we know that we're not overspraying on food or around very delicate plants. One tip is to wet the area around the coil being cleaned if it's outdoors, so that if any overspray does happen, it's being diluted by more water that's already there. And when in doubt on roofing materials, if you're not sure if the coil cleaner would potentially damage that roof, test the roof in a small area in a corner, or pick up the phone and call Nu-Calgon. But on the job, it's always best to test that roofing material rather than just start cleaning. And avoid coil cleaning on abnormally windy days. And what that's meaning is, if you've got a strong gust of wind and you're spraying a coil cleaner, the chances of that wind bringing some of that mist and spray back onto the person using the cleaner could be high. And again, we want to avoid getting that mist on us. So if it's a very windy day, it's probably not the best day to be up on a rooftop cleaning a coil. Some other best practices when cleaning coils is always read the directions and follow the recommended dilution ratios. It doesn't mean more is not always better. So when using a cleaner, many times it could have a mix ratio of 3-to-1. And what that means is you would put 3 parts water into a bottle, and then you would put 1 part cleaner. Our cleaners at Nu-Calgon typically are highly concentrated. We do have some ready-to-use cleaners, but many of them are concentrated, and that means they are designed to be diluted. They actually work better when they're diluted. When diluting those cleaners, we always recommend to put water in the sprayer first and then add the chemical. And the reason is, if you put the water in first and there's an accident and it gets spilled over, there's less chance of chemical being spilled, because you only put the chemical in at the very end and then you put the lid on. So it's ideal to put the water in first. Plus, if you were to put chemical in first and then water, there's a chance of that water splashing the chemical up. So always put water in first, then add the coil cleaner. And then before you start cleaning, a very important task is to shut down and disconnect all primary energy sources to the equipment that's being cleaned. We don't want it to turn on or be energized while the cleaning is happening. And then we apply a liberal amount of the coil cleaner solution onto the coil and allow it to work or dwell time of about 5 to 7 minutes. And that will depend on how dirty the coil is and how thick the coil is. But you want to apply the coil cleaner, let it sit, let it break down the dirt, and then thoroughly rinse the coil cleaner. And that is important to rinse the coil and also the area around the coil where the runoff might be going. So if it's on a rooftop, we want to make sure we rinse that coil cleaner off there. You don't want to leave it puddled or sitting there. That may mean in certain areas that you need to collect that with either shop vacs or different collection devices. But we do want to make sure we don't have puddles of coil cleaner laying around in certain areas. Same with condensers in the backyard. We don't want coil cleaner puddled in the backyard if kids or dogs go in the backyard to play after the cleaning is done. And as far as the equipment goes, we always want to flush the dispensing sprayer with water to ensure a long service life, and also to make sure that there is no chemical residues left on that sprayer for the next time that you're using it. Never pour the unused coil cleaner in an unmarked container. We always want it to go back into the original bottle if there's any left. We don't want people like in the picture writing, not Windex, or, writing on there New Bright, because that bottle now does not have all the proper warnings on it. So it should go back in the original container if there's any left over or disposed of. And double check the cap. If there's cleaner left over and you're putting the bottle back in the truck, make sure the bottle cap is tightly secured. That is important because in a truck it could tip over, and after it's been opened it doesn't have the original seal on it. So we're now putting that pressure sensitive cap back on tightly to make sure it makes that good seal. And if there is no cleaner left over and the bottle is going to be disposed of, we always want to rinse that bottle out, make sure that the chemical basically is rinsed out of it, and also put the cap on and put it on tightly. It has a child-proof cap on there for a reason, so we want to put that cap on there tightly and discard that bottle in the trash. That way, if anyone were to come up, any kids were able to get the bottle, it would still be closed and they wouldn't have any access to any residual chemicals. That concludes the basic chemical handling training from Nu-Calgon. We appreciate you watching this, and be safe. Thank you.